Time travel, that long sought after power to travel forward or backwards in space-time to see the future or correct the errors of the past. And while we can kind of figure that backwards time travel will never happen, because if it were to happen, someone probably would have gone back in time and stopped Lyndon Johnson's ridiculous Great Society welfare schemes and might have stopped Barbra Streisand from ever singing. We can figure that we can learn some lessons from looking back in history. So why don't you travel back 4 decades with me right now and learn some lessons from the history of Bernie Sanders' wacky socialist ideas. Hi everyone, I'm Gardner Goldsmith for MRC-TV. And you know, we just recently pushed those clocks ahead an hour in most places in the United States, and the days are looking a little bit brighter later in the afternoon. So why don't we take this opportunity to do some virtual time traveling and go back about 40 years to see some of the fascinating policy recommendations of Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders. We'll have some laughs and well, all right, maybe we won't have some laughs, but we'll learn a few things, okay? In fact, other people are doing just this sort of thing, and we can compliment Reason Magazine's Matt Welch for starting us off to get us an opportunity to look at one of the craziest ideas that Bernie had back in the 1970s. His genius policy proposal, and one of his first, was, get this, to expand the highway ramps in the United States to accommodate, hitchhikers. Well, that's on the light side. Let's get a little more serious now and look at the video that popped up from many decades ago during Bernie Sanders' longtime hug affair with the Soviet bear.
I think it's also fair to point out that when we were in Moscow, for example, I think most of the people here also were extremely impressed by their public transportation system. The stations themselves were absolutely beautiful, including many works of art, chandeliers that were beautiful. It was a very, very effective system.
Praising its ethically and economically bankrupt system, even as it danced on the bones of tens of millions and dictated everything from the kinds of fish that should be caught to the kinds of art and literature people would enjoy.
And cultural programs which go far beyond what we do in this country. We went to a theater in Yaroslavl, which was absolutely beautiful, had 3 separate stages where cultural programs are put on by professional actors and actresses, including a puppeteer area. And the cost, the highest price of the ticket that you can get, was the equivalent of $1.50.
Yes, Bernie also appeared to have no trouble with the thousands murdered by Castro, the tens of millions that were slaughtered and starved in communist China, the suppression of free speech in both nations, the arrests and enslavement of dissidents. And of course, he had this to say about the youth in both of those countries. Quote, "Contrast what the young people in China and Cuba are doing for themselves and for their country as compared to the young people in America." End quote. Those would be the young people who survived starvation, deprivation, state terror, or arrest for dissent as their nations became totalitarian dystopian wonderlands, Bernie?
That's my view.
Okay, but what should we expect from a collectivist socialist who in a 1976 press release said this about business people who were considering leaving the United States to escape the taxes and burdensome regulations that politicians had placed on them at that time? Quote, "In the long run, the problem of fleeing corporations must be dealt with on the national level by legislation, which will bring about the public ownership of the means of production and their conversion into worker-controlled enterprises." End quote. Oh, yes, Bernie, don't allow people to escape tyranny. Don't decrease the burden on them and, by association, the consumers. No, not at all. Do what the Wicked Witch of the West would have done. You know, it's not as if revolutionaries like Comrade Bernie haven't already tried these types of policy prescriptions all around the world to uniformly disastrous results. Indeed, They have had the effects of raising tombstones instead of crops, the destruction of debate, the actual erosion of the concept of truth, and the inability of people to be able to make decisions for themselves about what they value that are so essential for the supply and demand curves to function and move resources to where they're needed. Yeah, you know, the idea that underlies all of this, that we can learn from the 1970s ideas of Bernie Sanders, is that self-ownership is very important, and it translates to property ownership. In fact, it's all about respect for one's neighbor. Indeed, well, going back in time might not be possible, but looking back in time is. So thank you for traveling back to the 1970s with me. You didn't even have to put flowers in your hair. And hopefully we will be able to learn more from looking back in history as well. Thanks again for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe and to tell your friends about us. For MRC-TV, I'm Gardner Goldsmith.